my boss, who's the president of the African Development Bank Group, and my colleague, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, who is our gender envoy. And I am very grateful for this opportunity to kick off our conversation on why CEOs should care about the gender, or about the girl dividend. Now, this year, we at the African Development Bank are celebrating 50 years of continuous service to the continent of Africa. But over the 50 years, we have learned certain lessons. One being that the demands of development are huge. And the greatest mistake you can make is just dispersing all your efforts and trying to do them all. And so we have learned to be smart and to be selective. And you really have to be smart in choosing your sectors of intervention. So as an institution, we have focused on sectors that have a high catalytic and transversal effect, which gives, as they say, the most bang for the buck. Infrastructure development is an easy example. It unlocks and speeds up the pace of development in other sectors, including education, health, agriculture, regional integration. So you build a road. It provides better access to schools. It gets the produce from the farm to the market and the processing plant. It gets that pregnant woman faster to a hospital. And so we go into infrastructure development, and 60% of our resources actually is focused on infrastructure development, and we're hitting on all of the other sectors by doing that. But another sector which we have found is similarly catalytic and carries a high level of development return on investment is gender. The focus in this regard is promoting gender equality with the particular objective of addressing inequalities between genders and removing the barriers hindering the African woman from realizing her full potential and being an active player in the economy. So the African Development Bank, in implementing its 10-year strategy for inclusive growth and transition to a green economy, adopted a gender strategy. And that gender strategy has 3 pillars to close the divide of inequality. The first being legal status and property rights. Second, economic empowerment. And third, knowledge management and capacity building. But coming to gender equality, what exactly are we talking about? We need to remind ourselves that this is about unleashing the potential of 50% of Africa's population. And if you focus on Nigeria, we're talking about 49% of 175 million people. Let's drill down further. Children's rights. The largest population group in Nigeria, 43%, is actually children, 0 to 14 years of age. And that group, actually, girls constitute 48%. So this is what we're talking about. It's about the pipeline. It's about the future. We say a dividend, it's what we do about that 0 to 14 years, that 48%, that's going to determine whether we have a dividend or a tax or burden on society. So this is what we're talking about. And the number, we have 37 million girls between age 0 to 14. So this is what the conversation is about. And Toyi has reminded us that 10.5 million of those are out of school. So our pipeline is already, should we say, getting cancerous? and needs healing pretty quickly. Now, gender equality, and talking about girls, it is not popular. If this was a program on infrastructure development, it'll be standing room only, and everybody will be here. So the first thing we need to realize is that we're dealing with a subject that is not popular. And we're dealing with a subject that is totally not considered to be a subject of business. It's charity. It's what you do with the leftovers. And it's what you do when you start thinking, there is a God somewhere, I need to take care of my neighbor, I need to do something that's considered good, but not something that makes business sense. And this is why we need champions. When you talk gender, immediately the walls come up. And what are these walls? And we've started talking about them. Religion. And some of those that will build the walls are actually women. It's not just about men. Some of them are actually women. So you get the wall of religion, comes up immediately. Culture is the next one that comes. Social norms and mindsets. And so the walls are there. Immediately you say gender, you see walls. And so we need champions. We don't need infrastructure champions. We need gender champions. AFDB does not have a special envoy for any development sector. But we have struggled with gender both internally and externally, which is why President Kaberuka had to bring in a special envoy on gender. And it's beginning to work, but it's an uphill battle because it is not popular. And some of those conversations with decision makers are conversations that are just between two people behind closed doors. So we need persons of influence. And this is where the CEOs come in. Whether you're a CEO of a large institution or a small one, you have influence. And that is what we need when we start talking about girls' education. We want to leverage your influence. We want to leverage the fact that you're a decision maker. Even if you have only 2 employees, you have influence over those 2 employees. You have influence on allocation of resources. You have influence on how your institution is being run. Now, what exactly is the girl dividend? We've said we're talking about 0 to 14 years, 37 million girls in Nigeria. That's the future workforce. The Mo Ibrahim Foundation said their research came up with a figure that 41% of the future workforce of the world is actually going to come out of Africa. But that will happen if Africa prepares that 41% that will be placed in the world, but whether they will be the future workforce of the world or the factory line for terrorism actually depends on what we do with them. So these are the future, it's the future workforce. These are suppliers for your factories. These are your future clients. These are leaders in society, consumers of products, wives, mothers, heads of households. And financially, this is 13.9 billion US dollars being contributed to the economy of Nigeria annually. This is what we're talking about if we get it right. And this is what business needs to understand, and this is what government needs to understand. Research has confirmed that when women earn income, they reinvest 90% of it in their families, compared generally to men who are supposed or who are found to invest between 30 to 40%. So there's a knock-on effect when you invest in a woman. And that knock-on effect is actually felt immediately in the community in which she's in. Now, my brother, who is in the room, and the medical doctor, tells me that 50% of emergency room cases that they get are attributable to a lack of education, and a lack of education on the part of the mothers. So this is what we're talking about also, that there are children who were born whole, healthy, that have become maimed because their mother lacked education. And that child has become a burden now to the family and to that mother, and a burden to society. But it was avoidable only if she had an education. So Africa has evolved from being the hopeless continent to a rising continent with at least 5 of the 10 world's fastest growing economies and 11 of the world's 20 fastest growing economies. But these are numbers. I work in development, we quote them, but it doesn't put food on the table. It doesn't create jobs. And the numbers are getting better, but the divide is getting wider. So these numbers are plagued with inequalities in society. And it is impossible for Africa and countries like Nigeria to achieve their development goals and objectives without ensuring that none is left behind, in particular 50% of its population. Now, I'd like to mention, and we've been talking about the role of government and how government has actually been an obstacle. You know, the old development model was government focused. That model is no longer tenable, and we have to understand it. It's not about government. Development is about all of us. It's about the people. It's about private sector. And so there is an alternative when it comes to development. Government has a role, but it is not that you cannot have solutions without government, or government has to lead. No, the citizens have to lead. Private sector has to create the alternative, and private sector has to play its role. And it's these partnerships that we are beginning to see are impactful. That same partnership that is working in infrastructure development, we need to have similar partnerships when it comes to girls' education and girls' rights. Now, the girls that constitute or that have a strong potential of being a dividend in the future, those girls are in the same communities in which businesses are operating. And businesses, if that business is operating and will continue to operate, it's because you're making a profit. It's not a charity. And so, if you want to sustain that profit, invest in your future clientele. Invest in your future workforce. And the permanent secretary may not respond because maybe he or she doesn't see the urgency. They don't think like business people think. And money in government and the time value of $1 in the public sector and the time value of $1 in the private sector are very different. And that's why if you can't adopt a public school, create your own school and run it. And get those children who are going to the public school to come to your school and let them come for free. You are going to adopt a public school anyway. I mean, in Nigeria, public school is government owned, so it's like the total opposite of what you have in the UK. So I hope I'm not confusing you all. So create your own schools. But what we're seeing is that private sector, they're creating schools, but they are some of the most expensive schools. They're making a killing out of education. So we're saying, great, fine. It's an alternative, but let's create a different alternative. Use your CSR resources to create those schools, and let the poorest and the underprivileged actually be the ones that are attending those schools. And let the privileged come to the UK or go to Cumberland or go wherever. And so private sector, and Nigeria's private sector and Africa's private sector, I think we have not seen it do so well as it is doing now. The figures, the returns are unbelievable. And the confidence that Africa has in its private sector has never been like that. I mean, in the past, if you as a private citizen went to any financial institution, particularly an international financial institution, and you wanted a loan for a project, folks would look at you like, are you out of your mind? I am going to put my credit behind a private citizen in Africa? Forget it. You had to, it was only government. But now, folks will deal with the private sector before they deal with the government. And they're taking Nigeria's private sector and making unbelievable loans to them. So it's never been this good in the history of the private sector, as far as I know it. Now let's leverage that success. Let's leverage it for these girls. I think this is a great place to stop.